We have everybody. Awesome. So let me pull up my notes. So we are starting Unit 4, which over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be focusing first on some web technologies, and then second on your portfolio. So our real hope is that this gives you an introduction to some of the technologies that we work with when we're designing for web specifically, and then also gives you a chance to really dive into how to make yourself really a sellable employee, potential employee for the companies we'll be applying to. And why am I teaching this course? So my background in technology actually started in design and writing, journalism. So I have a bachelor's degree in journalism and communications. I worked for a newspaper for several years, and that was in the beginning stages of when the web was really coming into its own. And we started putting our newspaper online, so I got a little bit of experience with some transferring our print elements into HTML for that newspaper. I went back to school because decided newspapers wasn't the direction I wanted to go. I actually studied youth and family recreation, which is sort of a tangent off the side. But from that degree, while I was working on that degree, I became the webmaster for one of the programs on the university campus. So I began developing skills in HTML, CSS, and then PHP coding. So basically, I was managing that website and designing for it. So doing both the design and the development on that website. So I've got a background. It's a little bit few years ago, but still the basics are the same. And then after the master's degree, I got a PhD in instructional psychology and technology. And while I was doing that degree, I became a UX designer for an internship as part of that degree. And that was felt like fitting myself into a glove. It was just the perfect fit for me as a career. So I've been doing user experience design ever since. I finished my PhD while I was working full-time, so it was a bit of an ordeal, but I finished and then just worked full-time as a UX designer for several years. And you may or may not know Josh Snell here at Lambda School. He's the one who brought me onto Lambda School because he and I worked together in a couple of different places and have been good friends for a while. So Lambda School has been an awesome journey for me in being able to be part of this educational process, introducing others to the field of user experience design and seeing the importance of joining our understanding of technology and design. That is a really good place for this unit to be at right now, helping people understand that. So I've worked at agencies and at small startups. I worked for an agency that had an office in Utah and then an office in New York City. And while I was working for them, I was doing work for companies like PepsiCo and Tough Mudder, and we did stuff for Lay's, the chips company. So kind of a lot of big companies, as well as I've worked really small and local startups as part of that agency as well. So I've got this knowledge across a lot of different fields, a lot of different areas that I've worked in the user experience design field. Wanted to give you kind of an information about me so that you can understand where I'm coming from and being able to teach you some of these skills that we're going to be teaching you here. And because we're starting this unit and we have a fairly small group of people, I would actually like to just take a couple of minutes and hear from you, each of you, just where you're from and maybe something that you felt has been really great that you've learned about UX so far, and anything that you would like to learn maybe would be another one. So I'm going to go from the bottom of my Zoom screen and just read across. Miguel, would you mind going first?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm from Washington, D.C. And reason why I want to become a UX designer is because I do enjoy creating actual products and being able to actually see a public product and see it and be, hey, I created that. And so that's something that really resonates with me the most.
Awesome. Thanks. And Kelsey, you're next on my list.
Hey, yeah, so I'm Kelsey Adams. I live in Philadelphia, originally from Maine, and I want to be a UX designer. So I have a degree in art and design, and I just wanted to channel my creativity into an area that was a little bit more practical, and like use my skills of empathy to deliver things that people needed. So, yeah.
Awesome. Good to meet you too. And JP, you're next on my list.
Hi, my name is John Patrick, but you just call me JP. Before I was getting into UX, I was a software engineer, but although I didn't really feel that passion, creating, products and creating things that I really liked. And I like really aesthetically pleasing things, so which kind of brought me to UX because the feeling of creativity and imagination kind of brought me to UX. So that's how I kind of got into it.
Very nice. Great to meet you. And Brandon, you're next.
Hey everyone. So I got into UX because I graduated with a degree in psychology for undergrad, and UX just seemed to just fit with what my interests were best. So it just seems like it's a good fit for me in terms of like what kind of work we do, and just the whole process of everything just fits with my personality best.
Very cool. Good psychology background. Awesome. Ivan.
Hello again, I'm Ivan, and I'm here in UX because I like creating content. I like making people, happy and fun, and that's one of the reasons I'm here. And so far, I've loved to see my progression throughout the whole course and see myself get better. And I'm definitely excited to get started in the industry.
Awesome. Nora, I think you're next.
I am based in San Francisco, and I decided to do UX because it seemed really challenging, and I thought I'll give it a go, and so far I'm really enjoying it. So here we are.
Fantastic. Navia?
Okay, so I'm based in Seattle, and I actually have a computer science degree, but it's from a really long time ago. And for the most part of my life, I've been doing interior design. And recently, I felt like a pull to sort of go back and to the IT industry. And this seemed like a good merge of my talents coming from interior design problem solving and the technical side that I will never remember most of it, but I think I'm hoping that it would be helpful.
Great. I know that feeling. All right, Serena.
Hey, so currently I am in Puerto Rico, but I am based out of San Francisco. I'll be going back shortly. And I picked up UX design. It was kind of by chance. So my background is interior design as well. And being in San Francisco, a lot of my clients were in tech, and following their conversations of what they're doing and what they did on a daily basis in UX design really resonated with me. And I felt that I could cross-communicate a lot of the design that I've learned throughout the many years of doing interior design actually translated well into UX design. And I went to a lot of meetups and like organizations that would discuss UX design, and I felt that I could understand all of it. So I thought this was amazing, and I wanted to jump into it. So very much enjoying it.
Awesome. Thank you. And it looked like Christina joined us. We're doing just introductions really quickly. Do you mind sharing your experience and where you're from?
Sure. I'm originally from Detroit. I spent 4 years in the military. When I got out, I started learning graphic design, and then I went to school for computer animation, and then I went to school for illustration. And then when none of those panned out, I learned how to code. And when that didn't pan out, I decided that I was going to go ahead and stop ignoring the little voice in my head and learn how to do UX.
Awesome. So it's great to meet you all. Actually, Gabe and Kyla, maybe I'll have you guys give me an introduction too. Gabe, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. So I'm from Long Beach, California, but I'm currently in San Diego. I was in financial services for like six years, and I've always been into like just anything design. I always looked at it as a hobby, and I discovered coding while I was in my previous job, and I coded for every day for 6 months. The reason why I decided to go into the web program, because I just didn't want to design aesthetically pleasing things. I also wanted to make it functional. And while at the web curriculum here in Lambda, I kind of just rediscovered my passion for design, and it's been a really nice ride. I've been here for like a little over a year, and I'm excited for what's next for me.
Awesome. And Kyla.
Yep, I'm Kyla. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri area. So I originally I went to school for fine arts, finished in sculpture. Then I went back to school for philosophy and studied high logics, and did that kind of stuff for a while. Went to grad school. None of that really seemed to make sense when then I became a bartender for several years, and then decided that wasn't working and I needed a new path, and discovered Lambda School and UX, and was really excited to get into design. And while I've been in this, I've really learned that I really enjoy studying usability and usability testing, and figuring out ways to simplify things and still give users more control. And that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate you sharing a little bit about yourselves. One thing that I've discovered just in general is user experience design draws a lot of different personalities, a lot of different interests. I think there's a common thread, which is a sense of empathy, wanting to help people make their lives better, a sense of wanting things to look nice and be good and be usable, and then just a sense of discovery, wanting to learn things. And that, I think, is pretty universal throughout the user experience design field. So I think we see that here in this group, and we've seen it in a lot of our students. One of the conundrums that we run into then is that we have lots of different skill levels, different aspects of the program that we teach. So we're teaching design skills, which some of you have a lot of background in terms of either interior design or graphic design. Then we have some coding skills that we teach, and some of you have background, even a CS degree. And so some of what we come to sometimes feels like it might be a little bit redundant. You want to get into the stuff that you don't know already. So as we get into that this time around, I just want to encourage you that if there's things that feel easy to you, go ahead and get them complete, and then work on the things that you feel like will move you forward in the areas that you need help on. And but go through the motions at least of doing the assignments that we assign, so that we can recognize the skill level that you're at, and that we can then endorse you in the end and say, yeah, this student has shown us that they're capable in these areas. But then by all means, spend the extra time that you may have in learning new things, practicing your design skills, whatever it is that you can do. And then we'll try on our end to provide you with as much feedback and guidance as we can, and we have resources for right now to help you get to the level that you need to be at and want to be at. in order to jump into your career. So just wanted to make that little caveat there. It's super helpful to have your cameras on for me. Now, it looks everybody so far has had their cameras on. That's been awesome. And just wanted to reiterate that as I teach, a lot of my being able to sense where you're at comes from be able to look at you and see what your engagement level is. See if I need to pump up the energy level or something. All of that is very helpful. If I see your faces, you can see confusion as well. If I need to stop and clarify something, that's really helpful. The last thing I want to introduce is just if part of this coding side of things is intimidating to you, I just want to recognize that can be, it's a new language really we're learning. It's a new way of thinking about things. I'll try to tie in some of the things we're teaching to other skills or experiences you might have, so that is able to relate more to what it is that will help you be able to understand the concepts more. And definitely rely on your fellow students who have background in this. I think if we can help each other understand these principles and concepts better, that'll just be better for everybody all around. All right, with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about why we are teaching coding. And I'm going to pick on people as I teach just to give me answers. If you have a real concern about me just calling on you randomly, please DM me and let me know so I can address that and not make you overly uncomfortable. But with that in mind, I'm going to start with Kelsey. Would you mind telling me your thoughts about why you think that we are trying to teach at least the basics of code at Lambda School for designers?
I mean, for me, it's something that was self-evident when we were doing the Build Week project. Like, I had a little, because I have very little to no experience with coding. And so some of the things that I had designed, the builders were like, hey, can you like make this different so it can actually fit with what we can build? And that really made me realize that, hey, like if I knew some coding, like I would have a better idea of what's actually possible to make. And then I can design things that will more suit that. And obviously I don't want to let that inhibit me too much. I think sort of as an artist, as a designer, it's always good to like maintain your creativity and continue to push boundaries. But certainly if you're in a rush to get something out, like you want to be thinking about like, hey, how do we design something that we can make really quickly?
Awesome. I'm honestly glad that you had that experience in Build Week. That's the kind of on-the-job experience that I think is really beneficial when you go into an employer and talk about, yeah, I worked with developers, I found out, design this, and I needed to make some changes, and then we learned more about the technology so that I wouldn't run into that mistake again. That's the type of story you can tell an interviewer that helps them understand the level that you're at, which is going to be above most other students basically coming into UX right away. So great observations. Being able to understand what it is that the technology can do is going to make a huge impact on how you design. But I really love the comment you made about you don't want that to limit your creativity. And I think that's an important aspect. We do want you to remember there's going to be jobs that you're at where you have to just get things done on deadline and everything at, and then there may be other opportunities where you're trying to push the envelope and innovate on existing technologies or an existing problem that nobody has provided a good solution for. Sometimes you have to push beyond what the code can, or what developers want, or what developers think is easy, but to push the envelope a little bit. So awesome comment, thank you. So we are trying to be able to know the technologies that we're trying to build. I think having a little bit of empathy of what those designers have to do, who, oh, sorry, I'm getting a phone call. Let's see. So we want to build out the empathy as well, of what the designers or what the developers are able to do and what difficulty they may have in accomplishing something. there are many conversations that I have as a user experience designer where I want to have them design something. They say, no, that's too much work. So we can have a conversation about, because I know how much work it takes, then I can say, well, yeah, what if you tried this, or maybe you could consider this, and being able to speak to them on a level that they understand, and that they know that you understand what it is that they're having to go through. You can often break down barriers and be able to have much better conversations and much better camaraderie with the teams that you're going to be working with. So you think about these digital products are built with code. That's the underlying structure around which all of the experiences that we create as user experience designers are built on. So understanding that foundation of the product medium helps us design those better products. I'm gonna ask for a volunteer. Is there anything else other than what we've talked about as why you might think it's good for a designer to learn how to code at least a little bit?
I think as we kind of move forward, like as tech advances, the lines kind of start to blur between a front-end developer and a designer, because there are a lot more job postings that are looking for people who know how to code in at least HTML and CSS and JavaScript to kind of help with like rapid prototyping and things like that. So I do see like where that could be kind of important to know. To at least have like a baseline knowledge in it. You know, not necessarily spinning up entire apps, but being able to sort of like show what you expect the code to look like with your, along with how you designed it.
Yeah, awesome. That ability to do high fidelity prototyping is a great asset and skill that you can bring to the table. And there are a lot of jobs that are beginning to come out where that is a user experience engineer or something similar, title similar, creative engineer, something like that, where you're combining the role of the designer with the role of the front-end engineer. And, you know, if as you learn this technology, it becomes something that is really interesting to you, that could be a direction you could point your career. You get that specialized role as a user experience developer. I think, Miguel, it looked like you might have unmuted. Did you have something to add there?
Yeah, so definitely just building off of Christina is that employers are looking for unicorn employees. So definitely having that added characteristic is something that could always benefit you.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And whereas in these 2 weeks, we're just giving you a taste, there is the option that you may have moving forward. Right now we're working with the labs team. They're doing the labs where you're working directly with the developers, creating products as user experience designers. Then we have some additional time built in where we have been giving people a chance to do a ancillary track, or what might be called an elective, and actually pursue the web development track. And if that's of interest to you as you learn these things, definitely let me know so we can talk about how we can facilitate that if that's the direction you want to go. And the last thing is I find development actually fun, being able to see your work come to fruition in the actual end technology as opposed to just a InVision prototype or in Figma. So that can be an aspect of it. If it doesn't seem fun to you, then just bear with us for a couple of weeks, and then we move on to the next steps. But that's where another benefit potentially of doing coding. Awesome. Any questions or additional thoughts about that?
I've also gotten the impression that, especially if you're working for a smaller company, you're sometimes expected as a UX designer to kind of wear like multiple hats. And certainly there's some confusion, even here at Lambda. This is another thing I experienced during Build Week, where people don't necessarily know the difference between like a UI person and a UX person. And depending on the company you work for, they may expect you to be doing a lot of those like UI things that include the HTML and CSS. So yeah, I think yeah, just in terms of being more well-rounded and a better asset to more employers, then it's good to have this information.
That's very true. And it pays to really read through a job requirement, understand what it is that they're looking for, and read between the lines as well to know how much of that skill level they're actually needing. And there are definitely jobs that require us to wear those additional hats. All right, let's talk a little bit about the internet and how browsers work in general. So before we actually start getting into writing code, I want to hear, does anyone know how the internet actually works? How does code from a user experience that we can interact with? How does the code become a user experience that we can interact with?
It's basically a bunch of functions grouped together, and the code just says, hey, if you do this, run this function. If you do that, run that function. And then some of them, they save data so you can see what you're seeing. But of course, a little bit more complicated.
Cool. Sorry, did somebody else start talking? Couldn't see. All right. Yeah, I'm going to do a quick diagram. See if I can share this really quick. This is hit and miss technology. I'm trying to share my iPad. Oops. We're almost there. Sorry. All right, you're seeing my iPad, hopefully. Okay, it's back to the iPad. Is that a thumbs up? I didn't see. You guys see my iPad? Okay, great. So this is a fairly simplified version of how things work, but when we are creating web development or web experiences, we're essentially just writing files. These are files that are very similar in a lot of ways to our Microsoft Word files or a text edit file or even sketch files. It's all just a bunch of words, codes together. And what we do is we save these files into a server. It's essentially just a computer that has the ability to communicate and receive information and then share information. When we go to a web browser and we start typing in our URL, we're essentially trying to reach out to an IP address. So each URL name is connected with an IP address. Those IP addresses are essentially a phone number for a computer. So each computer has a single IP address. And once we make that connection, sending out information with this URL, then that server, which has its independent or its IP address, when the browser has made a connection, then the IP address knows, okay, they've asked for my information. They pass it back to the browser. And what are they passing back? They're just passing back that same file that we saved in there. Then what the browser does is it takes that file and it reinterprets the language that's in that file to a visual format that we can view, or for those with different disabilities or impairments, the browser renders it however that information is best consumed by the end user. But it's that same information in that file that gets pulled back into the browser so that we can get that experience that's been created for us. Any questions about how that works? Anyone want any clarification?
Could you maybe review the process so I can understand it a little bit better?
You want me to review this process?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right, so coming back to my diagram again, we have a file, and we're going to be talking today about what that file would consist of, but it's essentially just we start writing information into that file. And that file gets put on a computer, we call them a server, and those servers have what's basically a technology that allows them to communicate back and forth with other computers. And that why the idea of the name server is that it's serving information to you. So you ask for information, it serves that information back to you. So it's just a computer, and it contains, it's obviously going to contain lots of files for any given website that it is associated with that. So that server, when it gets connected to the internet, is given an IP address, which is essentially like a phone number. That IP address is something that is connected with a URL, which is the words that we type in our browser. So when I get on my browser, Chrome or Firefox or Safari, whatever it is I'm using, and in that top bar, or in some browsers you can type in the search field, but you enter in that URL, and it knows what the IP address is by making that connection. It sends a message to that server, says, this is the web page I'm looking for. And that server says, I have that information, and it's in the form of this file. And so it just sends that information back to the browser and says, here's the file that you were asking about. Once it hits the browser, then the browser displays, it changes what that code is, or it interprets the code that's in that file that we saved, and then displays it, renders it however is meant to be displayed or rendered by that browser for the consumer of the user. So when I'm designing user experience design, I make that visual design usually and how those interactions happen. And then the developer will translate what I'm saying that I want it to look like into code that goes to that server. Then the server can spit it back out. And then because it's encoded in a way that the browser can interpret, then it presents the display as I designed it as user experience designer. Did that help clarify anything?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
You're welcome. Awesome. So that's the basics of how the internet and browsers work. And when we're designing for web, that's what we're thinking about. The other technologies like mobile applications can render on a browser as well. So this same information applies when you're creating web designs for mobile devices as well as large desktops. But there's also different code that's used for different technologies. So iOS has specific language it uses to render information to the front screen, and the same with Android phones. And so as you design specifically for those, there are nuances to that display, but essentially the same type of thing is happening with those technologies as is with web. Any other questions I can help answer right now? All right. So as we just mentioned in this discussion, code lives in files, just like a Word doc or sketch design. These files are saved in a computer. And we need ways to be able to edit those files if we're going to create them from scratch. So developers generally use what's called an integrated development environment, which is an IDE. That's the term that they often refer to it as. And they use those to write code. There are lots of different IDEs out there, but for our class, we'll be using VS Code. I think I saw someone mention today that they didn't like Visual Studio as their coding mechanism, and that's fine. If you don't want to use Visual Code and you have experience with another one, that's fine if you want to use that for our assignments as we go throughout. So I want to see by a show of hands, I think Serena had asked and mentioned to everybody that we were going to be needing this in class today. So is there anyone who has not yet downloaded VS Code for their computer? You raise your hands. Looks like everyone's got it. So great. We will go ahead and jump into that. I want you to go ahead and open up VS Code if you haven't already. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I have my Visual Studio Code, VS Code up and running here. And I have my desktop on my Macintosh. I am going to be doing this the way we would do it in Mac, but essentially the same type of experience happens for another platform. But I don't have as much experience with other platforms to be able to troubleshoot very easily. So I apologize in advance for that. But if things don't work for you, if you're using Windows or something else and you can't get through this, let us know later so that we can help get you through that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a folder on my desktop, and I do Command-Shift-N to create a new one for myself, and I'll call it HTML Fundamentals. You can do this a few different ways, but I want to open this file in VS Code, so I'm just going to drag it over. And if you do that, then that should create the HTML fundamentals file that's on the desktop. You can also come through and do open folder this way through VS Code, double click on your desktop to open it. Okay. So because I had the folder open earlier on my desktop, it's acting kind of funny. So I'm going to go back to VS Code again. Do that same thing. Open it up. Now I have this HTML fundamentals folder available in VS Code, much like a file browser here. So now we have basically a folder on my desktop where I'm going to be adding the code that I'm creating for a website into this folder. This is where those files live that we were talking about that would end up being served to a server or stored on a server, then that pulls out from server.
Real
So,
quick, I don't
yeah.
have that. What you're seeing right now, like to create a new project. I have a whole
In this one
different
here,
kind of, yeah. Like this is
are
what I
you
have.
on?
If I can switch my camera.
Sure.
So there we go. That's the page I have. So you have a bunch of things like iOS, NetCore, tvOS. But I don't have.
Interesting. Is this a recently downloaded as well?
Yeah.
If you go to, let me share my screen again. If you go up to just the menu, that you're able to open a folder that way.
See, right now, if I go to File, I don't even have the open available.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so I hit File, and I put new folder, and I still get a super different thing.
Interesting.
I get this. If I can.
Did
There we
you
go.
drag your folder into VS Code or no?
This is what I get now.
And you're in VS Code?
Yeah.
So,
Visual Studio.
Let's try and troubleshoot that after class if we can, and if you can follow along, at least watching us for now, and then maybe may need to have you come back and watch the video, just because I'm not even sure where to start on troubleshooting that. So if you can follow along, at least watching for now, then we'll try to figure that out. And if there's anybody else who could maybe help on this side as well, maybe Gabe, I don't know if you feel comfortable with that, but
yeah, I'll message Ivan.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new file, and hopefully you have a menu similar to mine. Basically, clicking that link has created a new file within that HTML fundamentals folder. So I'm just going to hit the Command S and do a save, and I'm going to name this index.html. Index is the pattern by which most web servers recognize the first file that they need to serve if somebody comes to that IP address and asks for something from that URL. So index.html, and there's variants on that, but just to keep things simple, index is the first one that you're going to go for. So now I've saved this file as index.html. If I go out to my Finder, I can see that it has added that file into that folder. So basically, this becomes the source of all of those files that I may be adding to my website. All right. It's see, we want to go to that file and see what it looks like in the browser. So the default behavior in a Mac OS is if you double click on an HTML file in a folder on the computer somewhere, it's going to try and open it with the browser. So Chrome or Safari, whichever the default browser is going to try to bring up that file. So I just double clicked on it and it came up as a file, and it's just basically a white screen in Chrome. And you can see the index file here in HTML fundamentals on my desktop. Shows up here as the user's Christian desktop, HTML fundamentals, and then index.html. That shows me that that's the file that I'm in, have navigated to in the browser. Because it's an empty file, I'm basically seeing an empty screen. Does that all make sense? Does anyone have any questions about how that's working?
I got so I followed you fairly well until I had to, you had us do the command save index HTML. I did all that, but then I got an error saying that it was unable to save. So I don't know if I missed some other step along the way, but yeah.
The only thing that comes to mind is if you were trying to save to a location on your computer that you're not allowed to, but it doesn't seem like it would make sense.
That seemed to be what it was telling me. So I don't know if there's a specific area that we're supposed to save it to that I wasn't doing.
So I've just been saving mine to my desktop. I don't know if that's the same place that you're trying.
I'll try again.
Okay. That would be a good try. And then if we need to troubleshoot that, we can do that as well. But what I want you to do is try to create a couple of other files, everybody, as you're thinking about that. I'm going to go ahead and and when I hover over here under HTML fundamentals, there are menus for adding another file. And so I click on that. I'm going to say, if I was creating a website, for example, I might have my main home page. And what are some other examples of pages you might think about on a website?
Marketing or landing page.
Okay, so we've got a marketing or landing page. Good. What other pages might you think about if there were multiple pages on a website?
Logging in.
Okay, a login. So maybe I'll create a login screen. I'll just call it login.html.
Maybe onboarding.
Okay, and onboarding. So
maybe a folder.
Possibility.
How about different menus? Do they come?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you again.
How about different drop-down menus? Are those?
Say that again.
Menus, like when you click on something, any menu that might pop up.
Okay, so all that menu might be a listing of the pages that you might see. So if you're coming to, let's say something like lambdaschool.com.
I get it. Yeah, I see what you mean. It's just where it's just a place where all of the links to all the other pages are.
Right, exactly. So we have a login index, onboarding. So I might say Lambda School, what do they have? They have a curriculum, career placement. What is an ISA? So all of these might be different pages. So I think you're getting the picture. There's lots of sites that have an about.html, an about me type of page where you'd have that. So basically, I create all of these things in VS Code. I can look back and they're being created in that directory on the desktop that I've created. So I've got 4 now different HTML pages that I can reference within my website. And each of these pages has its own code in it that will need to be translated when someone is directed to that page to be able to display it on the browser. So for example, if I double click the About page now, I come to the About page and I can see in my browser that it is navigated to that file, and then it's displaying the contents, which right now are empty. So if I come here and edit the about.html page, I just write the word about and hit save. Then I know that if I refresh my browser, it's going to display what's on the page that's stored in the file. So if I have just a bunch of text I start writing in this page, it's basically going to display it as just a blob of text, and that's all I'm going to get. And so that's why we start talking about the code behind that display, and that's what HTML is now. But I want to pause here before we start getting into that HTML syntax and talking more about that to make sure that we haven't lost too many people unduly. I know there may be some technical issues, but from a conceptual standpoint, how are we feeling?
Well, I just downloaded the right VS Code.
Okay, that is a step in the right direction. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, I actually didn't know that there's a Visual Studio, then there's a Visual Studio Code. So what before was Visual Studio.
Gotcha.
It's kind of confusing. Why they do that.
Yeah.
Very.
I'm glad you guys got that sorted out, and hopefully I can take note of that. So for helping give clarification in the future. Awesome. Any other questions or concerns right now?
Yeah, how come we don't have any tags right now, or like we're not opening it? You wrote about in the first line and it's showing up on your browser, but wouldn't you typically have a tag if you're going to say that this is body?
Absolutely. And we are going to get into that. I wanted to sort of represent conceptually what was happening with finding files and bringing them back in and setting the stage for needing tags, because otherwise we have just text which has no meaning to it other than the actual language of English that somebody could read. But we want to get into the way to display this information, or a way to code it so that it can be displayed in a way that we want to. So that's what we're going to talk about next. So glad you bring that up. It's a good segue. Since we're close to the top of the hour, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's take 5. Now get a drink, whatever you need, and then we will be back in just a second. So I'm going to go ahead and put up a timer for 5 minutes. And we will regroup in just about 5 minutes.
Do you mind? Oh,
Sorry, what was that?
Do you mind just going over on how to create those new pages? Because I just have this empty.
Yeah. Yeah, let me...
I'm having a problem with it as well. So maybe we could do like a Zoom at some stage, or...
Let's just
or is
go
it
over that
enough, like 4 minutes
really
is enough
quick.
to set up everything again?
You should be able to get things pretty easily. So basically the idea is if you create a folder,
Okay.
so let me close out of this. Let me close out, quit, go to VS Code again. And I'll throw these in the garbage. So HTML fundamentals, if you create a folder on your desktop, then you can either drag it in to VS Code,
So right now I have at least that done. I had the HTML fundamentals folders on the desktop. I already dragged it in. And I'm in the welcome page.
All right. So HTML fundamentals, what you can do is there's a little symbol
Is
there.
it the new folder, or do you start a new folder?
That's in the HTML fundamentals folder. Because I dragged it in before, it was still there. But you can either open a folder like this to open that folder, or you can drag it over. And then you hit that button and you can do index.html. Hit return and it creates a file in both places. So you have one here. And then you can just repeat that process to do about. And let's see, login.html. That makes sense. So like you can just create files that way.
Okay, yeah, you have those now. I'm there now.
All right, great. So I'm going to run grab a drink.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry for a little bit of a delay. Right. So I spent the first part of the break helping couples get back up to speed with VS Code. Any questions before we start getting into the actual HTML syntax we'll be talking about today? All right. So HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. And we refer to it as a markup, meaning that whatever content we want on the page, there are marks around that content to help us understand what those content pieces are meant to display like. So we can think about kind of like if you've been using Sketch or Figma, those are like layers on the artboard, so to speak. Every time we want to add content to our design, we need to create a new layer in Sketch or Figma. And with our code, the same thing happens as when we put in a piece of content that we want to have on there. We need to have some sort of mark around it, the HTML, that helps us know what it is that we're wanting to represent in that content. Feels a little bit of esoteric, but hopefully as we start creating some elements, it'll seem to help you understand that a little bit better. So let's practice. We're going to be building an employee dashboard for a fictitious company called Employ. And that is going to look like this. Basically, we're taking a design and we're going to display it using HTML, using that syntax. So we'll talk about how each of these elements within this page can become part of our design by being rendered through HTML. So let's start by adding the text employees. We're going to go and open the index page right now. And like I did before, oops, I accidentally was typing in the wrong place. Employees, hit save, double click on the index page, it brings up the text. That's what we saw before when I did the about page, just plain old text. So the tags are created by using angle brackets. The angle brackets are on the comma and period keys of your keyboard. And each tag in HTML will be surrounded by those angle brackets. That's the way that we tell the computer, the server, that this is a tag in HTML. And these tags are also used in other programming languages for some pieces. But for HTML, that's giving a signal that this is a tag. Now, if you think about visual hierarchy, we want to think about what's the important elements on our page. We talk about text hierarchy, it's our headings. And HTML has built into it these tags that represent the different levels of headings within a document or within a page. And those heading tags are basically just labeled with 1 through 6. So heading H1, that means the very top heading. So we're going to go ahead and make this into an H1. And when we're making these tags in HTML, we have a beginning tag when it's surrounding content, and then an ending tag to help tell the computer, the server, that this is a layer or an entity within this document that needs to be displayed. So the way we indicate an ending tag versus a beginning tag is we do a forward slash. And as you can see in VS Code, they do a lot of code completion for you. And so it's adding that end bracket that I had already put in. So forward slash H1 means that this is an H1 tag. And the content within that H1 tag is employees. So we have this original view of what when we had just entered employees into the browser or into our file, and the browser just rendered it as text. And now we've put a tag on it using HTML, and if we refresh the browser, actually we save our file and then refresh the browser, it changes that text. And now we have the default display of an H1 tag in HTML. So you can see that if we don't have a tag around it, the text looks different than if we do. So I'm just going to write employees again. Employees. Save that. So you can see the difference between having that tag and not having the tag. The browser basically understands that I'm rendering the H1 in this format. That's the default format for an H1. And then if I don't have any tags associated with it, I'm just going to display it as basic text. All good?
Sorry to interrupt, but can you make that instruction screen a little bit bigger? I'm having a really hard time seeing what you're typing on it. So yeah,
this one over here?
Yes, slightly bigger.
Okay. Let's see.
You can press Command plus.
Command plus. Oops. There we go.
Great. That's perfect. Yeah, thank you.
It's good enough readable?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Awesome. I apologize for being too small there. So let's see, someone talk me through what I would do to add an H2 tag at this point.
Open bracket, H2, close bracket.
Okay. And you notice that as I was typing in and actually got the code in there, H2, then VS Code is already giving me a closing tag so that I don't have to do as much work. It's very helpful if you're coding every day to be able to have that kind of quick response. So something on this page, it might be an H2, let's say maybe the card, just for the sake of experimentation, would be Tommy Carroll. So we'll just try experiment with that. Tommy Carroll. Sorry. Okay, Tommy Carroll, I just saved that and I'll go back to my browser and refresh again. Now you can see H1, H2. So we're going to play with this and just follow along with me as you can. I'll try to go pretty reasonable pace. I'm going to go ahead and make an H3, and I'm going to make that a label under Tommy Carroll, the customer support rep. H4, we'll say my email address for this would be tommy@employee.com. Oops. If you're not careful, there's too much auto-completing for you. Okay, H4. So opening tag, H4, Tommy@employee, and then angle bracket / H4, closing angle bracket. 5, it's auto completed for me, and I'm going to enter a phone number with this formatting. Not what's on the design, but in an H6, I'm just going to do test, see that difference. So let's go ahead and see what the browser automatically does with that. Refresh. You can see that the browser automatically interprets each one of these different tags, H1 through H6, as a different size, but essentially the same font and font weight. And it's just rendering what I give to it. So if I make a typo, it's rendering the typo, or etc.
So for example, if like if I wanted the telephone number to be the same size as employees, I would, instead of writing H5 outside of it, I would just write H1 phone number, and then it would be the same size as employees.
Let's look at and see what that does. That is definitely one way to approach it. So if I do that, yeah.
Okay.
We can have that tag repeated multiple times. One thing that you should think about as you understand this rendering process is that search engines also use these tags to understand content on a page. And so if you're using an H1 tag, then the browser is going to say this is the most important part of this page. And
I see, which may not be,
right. So if you're using the tags as your sole way to make the presentation changes, then that could be problematic, because you want to be able to tell Google or whoever's doing that searching what is important about your page. And so that's why we talk about CSS, and we'll talk more about how that can help us make these changes. But you were right. If you use that tag, you can use it in multiple places and it will look the same wherever it's used.
I am curious though. So is H heading is the only syntax, or is it like for caption? Like, can I use it? Is there a C something or?
Yeah. Let's talk about a few other HTML tags. So P stands for paragraph. So if you have body text on your site, then having the P tag helps you just display information with that same basic layout. So I'm going to just.
My guess is that you actually programmed those before, right? Like if you already have your text styles, you program them before you actually use them. So it actually goes to the font that you want and everything.
Right, exactly. So as we talk more about HTML and CSS throughout these couple of weeks, you'll see that is definitely something that you plan ahead of time. So you make your design, or somebody makes the design, and the coder is then responsible to see from this design what matches an H1, what matches H2, et cetera, and how we can use those. But then there's also the C or the P paragraph tag. There's a caption tag, and there's some other elements. So let's walk through a few of what those look like. So I added some text, and this is giving me that paragraph level. And again, the browser just has some built-in displays of what this is. And out of just curiosity, let's open Safari and see how it renders. See, they're essentially looking just about the same, but browsers have the ability to represent their defaults a little bit differently. Okay, so you might actually see a default look to the browser if you're using Safari different from Firefox or Chrome, etc. But let's look at some what other code is. There are tags for adding styling such as bolding or italicize. So if I wanted to bold text, I can actually use a tag called strong. And just add some information in there. So we have strong text. If I refresh that, you can see that it's bolding that. Looks like I need an extra space there. So you can style the text using these elements. Another example is italicize, which we use the tag EM, which stands for emphasis. So emphasized things can help you. And you can see now also, see what that looks like, refresh. So it emphasize some strong text. So nested tags can happen within HTML because I have a paragraph tag, and within that paragraph tag, I have some additional tags that are nested within that. And so I don't close the paragraph tag until after each of those other tags have been opened and closed around that text. Oops. There are a bunch of tags. One thing that you often have to use in presenting information is bulleted lists. And so there's a tag for bulleted list, which is UL, which is an unordered list. And within an unordered list, you have list items. And so that's what LI tag is for. So we have list items. So this is the first item. This is the second item. I add that and return and render it, and it's got bullets. And so we've created a semantic description of the content we're creating through these tags. There's also ordered lists. So if you wanted to do a numbered list rather than a bulleted list, then I make this an ordered list, and that means that we will have ordering to it, which is numbers 2, 3. To begin to see the sense of anytime we have information we want to display, there's a tag associated with that type of information. And by understanding how this works, we can use those tags to help tell both the computer, the browser, what they need to display, but also other coders what it is that we've written here, because as they understand these codes, these tags, then we begin to help communicate to them what the intent is of that. Any questions so far about these tags?
I just had a, I'm just curious, I'm sure there's a ton of these tags that can do so many different things. I was just curious just if there was one that, for example, if I'm making a list and I don't want it to be either ordered or unordered, I just want the text to appear like a little bit like with a margin. Do I do that by using like heading syntax and just space, 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 and then write my text? Or is there a way to go ahead and say, skip that many spaces and then write?
That's a really great question. And the good thing about CSS is you can take, because that would still be considered probably an unordered list, but you just want it to be displayed in a different way than the bullets that are naturally there. So within CSS, we can add or remove bullets, change what the bullets look like. We can use CSS to increase the indentation or decrease it, add line spacing in between lines, like things like that. So you can absolutely take these elements that are displayed in a way that I don't really want them to, but because the meaning is the same, the way that we want them to be perceived is the same, then we can then add styling to make them display however it is that we want them to.
So styling afterwards, CSS?
What's that?
Styling, you know, changing colors and all of that, that you do in CSS? This is just getting stuff there?
Yep.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
No problem. So what we're doing with HTML is trying to give some clarity to the organization of the material and the information that we're trying to convey. So we give them labels essentially saying this is a heading, this is paragraph text, this is an unordered list, this is a box that everything else needs to live in. There's additional type of tags. And in fact, why don't we go ahead and look at an example of reference. There's a site called w3schools.com. There's a super awesome reference, and most of my learning early on when I was doing web development for the university, I would go to W3 Schools quite frequently to remind myself of a tag, for example, or to learn a little bit more about JavaScript or jQuery or whatever it is I was working at the time. So if you want to understand more, then bookmarking this as a reference is a really good idea. But you can see this is the HTML element reference. You can see all of the different types of tags that are available for you to use. I'm scrolling through this really fast because I wanted to just show you that there are a lot of tags. And do you have to memorize all of these? Absolutely not. Do you have to memorize any of them? It's helpful to know a few basic ones. Things like title and, I didn't need to click on that. The P tag, the H tags, and the emphasis and strong tags. This is the things used frequently, and there are structural tags also that we'll be talking about a little bit more as we get on again. But these references, the way that developers work is they try to understand the concept behind their program, and the more they do it, the better they get. And some of these things come by memory, but regularly developers are Googling, how do I do this again? And there's lots of resources online. So just feel comfortable that if you don't know something, Googling it is the great answer to say, what's the tag again that something, you do a search, try to figure out, and then you recognize it and you can use it. The point that we're trying to get to is to help you understand the context and the background here, so that when you get into it, you understand what it is you might need to search for, rather than to have you memorize all the tags or anything like that. So a couple of more tags I wanted to talk about specifically are the image tag and this will help you understand a little bit about using tags and attributes within tags. Okay, so let's say that and close this, refresh this page. Now you can see I have an image there. This IMG is the image tag, and this SRC represents the source, and it's an attribute. There are a lot of tags. With HTML, you can have a lot of attributes with tags. Source is a specific one for the image tag, which tells the browser to go to this URL, fetch that resource, and display it. So that's called an attribute. And you notice that because this is the item itself is the tag, and it contains the information about what is being displayed, it doesn't need a closing tag. Tags that mark out other content within the site, like language or words, have to have an opening and closing to show what that content is. And some tags have content indicated by attribute tags, and that's what is happening with this image tag. So then it knows to go and retrieve that. And that's why it doesn't have a closing tag. And then one more is called...
Now, I tried doing the same thing with Unsplash just now, but I didn't actually got the picture loaded.
It didn't grab the image for you?
No, and I did it from Unsplash. Did you just copy paste the URL once you clicked on the picture?
I had one stored in my notes, but it needs to include like all the HTTPS and everything. There
Yeah.
should be a link. You click on it.
Well, Ivan, it's not the URL of the actual page you're on.
Right,
You would need to
right.
right-click the picture
It
and
worked.
copy
It
image
worked now.
address.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Yeah. All
A
right.
lot of
Cool.
times that's what happens. That's why the image is not rendering.
All right. So the other tag I wanted to mention was the note tag, or it's basically how you can communicate about the HTML you're talking about without having it rendered on the screen. So I added this tag here and refresh. I save, make sure I've saved and refresh again. And after the image, there's still not anything. The note shows up. This exclamation point and these two dashes tell the browser that this is not something that you're supposed to display, but it is something that will be in the code. So if I was a developer and wanted to just make a note to another developer who might be coming back to understand what is being displayed, or if I just need to make a note about maybe attribution for where this photo came from, then I could add that as a note within the HTML, so it's there, but it's not viewable as part of the actual display of that design.
Can I ask a really quick question, please?
Yes.
So if I want to put an image into my browser, it has to be a link to it. How do I upload if the image is like on my computer? What would be the attribute for that? Is that the correct word?
Yeah, so it would be, for example, I have this employee desktop as a file on my desktop, and if I drop, let's see, I want to grab this browser and replace that really quick. And instead of that, I'm going to grab this name again and throw that in there.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So basically what you're wanting to do is create a reference to that file wherever it lives. So I can do that by referencing Unsplash. If I'm doing it just working as a web developer, just trying to do my testing, I can do that from my own computer, wherever, whatever that file is. But whatever that resource is that's listed in that source attribute, you need to, whoever is pulling up the browser needs to have access to that file. So if you were to share this file, I wouldn't be able to access it because I can't access your computer. That's why we have the web servers that we save our files to, and all of those would live within a file structure that the user could reference. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So the best practice would be if I want to use my own pictures, I upload them on a website someplace, and then just
yeah. So you link to wherever that browser is. And normally when you're doing web development, you have a devoted server and you would have an assets folder of some kind where those images would live that then it could reference.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right. Any additional questions right now? I want to introduce you to a new product called CodePen. It's not a new product, but it's something new to you probably. And CodePen is basically a web-based environment for trying out and testing web technologies. So it's codepen.io, and I'll show that in the group channel for you as well. CodePen is what's referred to as kind of a sandbox. It's a way for playing with these technologies to figure out how they work and be able to share things with others, show technologies, to do proofs of concepts, things like that. So I'm going to just give you a couple of minutes to go ahead and create an account for yourself with CodePen. And I'll just put on a timer for a couple of minutes while everyone gets a chance to make sure that they have access to that. Go ahead and go to codepen.io and create an account. Okay, hopefully everyone's been able to get their CodePen up and running. Is there anyone who's still working on it? Okay. Go ahead and stop that timer for now. Get onto CodePen. There are different ways of viewing CodePen. You can get your editors on the left and the browser display on the right, or the opposite, or on the top, you're editing and seeing the browser. So essentially, what we have in the left-hand side is the same thing as our file for the HTML file. So if I go here, do H1 and write employees, then it's updating this browser area as I do that. H2, name, H2. You can see basically what's going on there. That makes sense. So what I want to do is to see an actual project that's done in CodePen. We can actually see and write code and share that code together. And we'll be using this CodePen for assignments during our lessons. And then we just want you to be aware that CodePen is not something that you would use as your professional coding environment. You'd use something like VS Code as the tool for actually creating your website or whatever. But this becomes a way that you can do quick tests or share ideas with others. And I've used it to prototype, even in my UX career, an idea of a way I wanted information to be displayed on the site, and I couldn't explain it with words. I had to get into the code and show them my proof of concept of how it would work as they were going through it. So let's go ahead and practice by going to this challenge. Let me copy and paste this CodePen into the Slack channel. And if you click on that, basically open up the same project as a duplicate of the project that I shared with your name on it and everything. So open that up here. What I want you to do as part of this practice right now is to just follow the instructions on the left here. So the first comment, you can see how we've used the comment code. Oops, just hit that. For those of you who were wondering what I just did, there's a little tiny arrow next to the numbers wherever code is put in. And if you click on the arrow, it collapses that code. So you've got a lot of code in there. That becomes a way to help condense it, reduce your cognitive load while you're working on it. So we just follow these comments and start writing in this code block H1 tag that says the Lambda post. And just go through, each of you on your own, to just go through and do this. And I'll be sort of following afterwards, doing the same thing. And once I'm done, we'll talk a little bit more about it. Okay, I've gotten through the assignment or the challenge. How else is everybody else doing? Is there anyone who hasn't finished it yet? Okay. Give you a little bit more time to get through it. I'm going to stop my share for a minute. Is there someone who's done who'd like to share their screen with us? Let me have a look.
I'll
Go.
share mine because I'm already done.
Okay, go ahead, Christina.
So yeah, I went through and did the H1 and then the H2, and then I added the image in, and I put the alt text on it because that's what you're supposed to do with an image. You're supposed to add, because some people use screen readers and stuff like that, so the images might not pop up on it. So instead of it having just like a big blank space, this will show up in place of the image. And then I added the paragraph with the P tag in it. And then there's the H2 with the which is the other header.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did the unordered list, and that's it.
Awesome. Looks like you've got an extraneous letter I up there, right in between the headline and the
yeah
at the end of the code. Yeah, that's the type of thing that happens. And where that happens to a lot of us, and the computer doesn't know anything other than just to start showing the letter I, because it has no meaning next to it, right? So cool.
Right.
Great. And you can see, and everybody can probably see for themselves as they are seeing the material that's appearing within the browser. It's very unstyled. It just has basic visual increase in size based on the hierarchy of the text, the H1s, the H2s. And as we get into the CSS throughout the week, we'll be able to see how we can take this raw material that we're generating in HTML and make it look much better through our CSS, this cascading style sheets. That's what CSS stands for. All right, does anybody have any questions about what they've created so far and putting that CodePen together? Any confusion? I'm happy to just talk through anything that would be helpful.
I just have a quick question. Are backslashes essential in the closing tag?
Yes, for the browser to understand that it is a closing tag, and it is a forward slash as opposed to a backslash. And on the keyboard, the forward slash is the one after with the question mark key, as opposed to the one with the vertical bar key in the upper right hand corner. If that makes sense. But yeah, for those closing tags, it's necessary. A lot of browsers are very friendly to mistyped HTML, and so you can get away with code that doesn't have ending tags sometimes. But once you hit a place where a missing end tag exists, that it might interfere with a different tag and ending a different tag. And so sometimes those codes will get out of order and then everything gets displayed all weird and ski-wampus. So it's good to make sure that you get your ending tags in place. Even as forgiving as the browsers are, it's safer to have all of those in place.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Awesome. We're winding down now. So let's talk about the assignment for today. Let me pull that up. It's in the training kit. So let's pull that up. User experience design. And show the HTML and CSS. I need to share my screen. In the HTML fundamentals, scrolling to the bottom, our project for today is in 3 parts. First is, I just want you to reflect some of what we've talked about today in why you should learn code, why UX designers should learn code. What are the benefits, and are there any drawbacks to learning code that you see? Development environment, you want to create a folder on your desktop called Unit 4 Code. Open that folder in VS Code, and inside the folder, create a file called index.html. Open that file and take a screenshot of your screen. We should be able to see the file structure and the file itself, and add that screenshot to your Google Doc. And then start doing some HTML practice, creating the landing page for an online store called Spendly, spend.ly. It sells luxury products. And start by creating a new pen in CodePen. In your HTML, you should include the following: H1 tags, 1 H1 tag, 3 H2 tags, 3 paragraph tags, 3 image tags, 1 UL or unordered list tag with 5 list item tags. Based on those tags, you should add content that would make the most sense on the page. Keep in mind that this is an online shop selling luxury products. What would they want to highlight? And we're deliberately not telling you what that is. Just want you to think about the hierarchy of a message being conveyed on a website, and think about that from that very vague, but probably enough information to be able to at least create those tags and what might be important on a luxury products store. Make sure you save your pen and then add that link to the pen to the Google Doc. Then we have some stretch goals, viewing HTML tags, and circles on how the internet works, and then maybe writing some thoughts about those articles. Your submission should be titled UX HTML Fundamentals, your name, and you want to replace your name with your actual name, and then the screenshot, the link to the CodePen, and the Google Doc. Share that link to Google Doc in your daily form. And that is the assignment for today. Any questions about that? Or about anything else that we've talked about today? Okay, any questions about what's coming up during this week or anything else? At noon Pacific time, Nick Basile is going to be talking with you about just the feedback that we've gotten as a program and what we can do to help, and what we're trying to do to make improvements and respond to feedback and all of that. So feel free to jump in after lunch for that, so that you can weigh in or find out if anything is happening, what we're trying to do. And with that, I don't have anything else for today's lesson, so I will stay on till the top of the hour, or until everybody's out of the room. But I'm happy to answer any questions or help in any way I can till then. So thanks, everybody. Feel free to jump off at this point.
No background music?
Sorry, not Not right now.
No, all right, I'm good. I was just gonna hop off. See you tomorrow.
Okay, I see it. Thanks. Any comments? Questions?